All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my pleasure to present Karen Prager for our wonderful talk on seeds today. She has been gardening for more than 4 decades, including houseplants in California, some veggies, herbs, and flowers in Wisconsin, and more serious gardening the last decade in New Jersey. She became a master gardener in 2014 and worked professionally as an education researcher within the University of Wisconsin-Madison and at ETS as an educator at Madison College, where she taught remedial reading. And she taught remedial reading in Harlem in the 70s, as well as a journalist covering arts for the Capital Times in Madison, and as a talk radio producer for Wisconsin Public Radio. So quite an extensive resume you have there, Karen. Before we get into the presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go through. First and foremost, we will be taking questions today at the end of the program, but you can submit them at any time using the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can email me directly, and my email address is on the screen right there. Karen has prepared a fantastic and very detailed handout for today, and you can find that in the handout section of the dashboard. You should be able just to click on the handout file that will download, and you should be good to go. A note for Android or Apple mobile device users, you may not have access to the handout, but that's okay. Everybody will be getting a follow-up email that will include the handout. So in case you can't get it today, I will make sure that everybody has that opportunity. There is a survey that will be provided at the end of this program, as well as in a follow-up email. If you could please complete that, we always greatly appreciate all of your feedback, and it really does help us as we move forward with our programming. And lastly, on this slide, you can see that if you're looking for more information on gardening tips, you can visit the Master Gardeners of Mercer County's website there. I will send that out in the chat as a live link so that everybody will have that in just a moment. And before we get started, we'll just do a brief run through of GoToWebinar dashboard for those of you who may not be familiar. If you're on a desktop or a laptop, this is what you should be seeing for your dashboard. Those of you who are on iOS or Android devices, it's going to look different depending on the device, but the features are still there. If you do not see this, look for this orange box with a white arrow, either at the top left or right-hand side of your screen. That button will open and close the dashboard, and it's possible the dashboard loaded closed on you. If you are hearing me but can't see my screen, can't see the dashboard, look for a blue snowflake type icon in the bottom of your taskbar. You should be able to click on that, and that should be able to bring up everything for you. At any time today, if you are running into any issues and can't figure something out, you can always use this raise hand button here. That'll alert me that you're having some type of issue, and I will send a message to you, and hopefully we can be able to resolve that. As I mentioned before, there is one handout for today that'll appear in this handout section here, which you should be able to click on and download. If you are having problems trying to download it in Google Chrome, it could be a personal setting you have related to PDFs and how they open, so you can try a different web browser, or you can wait until my follow-up email, which will have that handout. And lastly, at the bottom of the dashboard should be your questions box. So again, type in your questions, hit send, that'll get sent to us, and we'd be happy to answer them at the end of the program. That is everything that I have for you today. So it is my pleasure now to turn it over to Karen.
Let's do this. Stop sharing my screen. And
all right, we can see it.
Pull this up and start from the beginning. Well, greetings, everybody. Let me start by thanking you for coming on this snowy, icy day for a gardening adventure to think about spring and planting. I am hoping that you're going to find it informative, and by the end that you'll feel comfortable knowing you can start seeds if you want to, indoors or outdoors, for veggies or flowers. I've been a master gardener now for about 7 years, and I like chatting up seeds because seeds are a bit of magic, nature's magic. Walk outside, or maybe today you want to look out the window. Just about everything in nature starts with a little seed, from a tiny mustard seed or an acorn to the largest seed that we know of, the 40-pound coconut de Mer. I'm definitely not an expert, so I'm going to apologize in advance for questions I can't answer. But there's not going to be any questions we can't get back to you about with the expertise of the master gardeners and Mercer County's own Margaret Pickoff, horticulturalist. Due to COVID, the Rutgers Cooperative Extension office is closed right now. So you want to contact us through Margaret by email. And you can see the email here. That is also on your handout, mpickoff@mercercounty.org. As soon as Rutgers University gives us the green light, the office is going to be reopened and Helpline back up and running. If you don't know Helpline, it's the arm of the Extension office run by Master Gardeners, and we answer home gardening questions on weekdays. In the interim, our website, MG of MC, is well worth visiting. That's down here, and that is on our handout. This is a picture of my native garden. It's sort of 75% natives and grasses and a few exotic elements tossed in. It had its 6-year-old birthday in November. And a full year before I planted, I layered the grass with cardboard so I could smother the turf. About a third of this was planted by seed, anything that I could direct sow outside. This talk hopes to take you from seed to plant, and I'm going to start with the seed itself. You might be surprised that that tiny little dried up bit that you hold in the palm of your hand is actually alive. Inside that hard layer called the seed coat is a tiny little plant, an embryo, and its own source of food, the endosperm. With the right conditions, this tiny little living entity can be coaxed to break its protective armor. It's going to send down a rootlet, send up a stem, and 1 for monocote or 2 for dicot seed leaves called cotyledon. These seed leaves are filled with enough nutrition to start life as a baby plant. As with all living things on our planet, seeds absorb oxygen and they emit CO2. And hard as it is to fathom, they have a circadian rhythm. They've survived for centuries, well, millennia, because the seed coat protects them till the conditions are right to sprout. Here's a video, and let me see if I can get that started. There it goes, and this is about a seed sprouting. Here goes the root. It's called a radicle, which becomes an anchoring root. Notice that the soil has room for the plant to breathe. You're going to hear the term well-drained soil because it's hard for the seed to get oxygen that it needs if the soil's too compacted. Here goes the support roots and the stem poking up. That's the plumule. This one is going to have 2 seed leaves. Again, they're called cotyledon. And then from the center of those seed leaves, the first true leaves are going to appear. This 1-minute video is courtesy of YouTube and the waltz, courtesy of Strauss. Let me see if I can move along. There we go. So why might you want to grow plants from seeds? As we just saw, there can be an emotional reason. Watching seeds emerge from the soil can be a pretty uplifting experience. There's joy in eating the fruits of your labor. You bring home ripe, juicy tomatoes, sweet peas, crispy green beans. Your diet improves. You're out in the fresh air and sunshine. You get the kids involved. You find yourself becoming social, chatting up your garden challenges and successes with neighbors. And it's uniquely challenging. There can be a financial reason. You can save money growing your own plants. It's a healthier diet for less. There's a matter of choice. You can grow varieties that just aren't available at local nurseries or big box stores. And there's the potential for better results. With a nod to lady luck or true skill, you can get an earlier harvest and better produce. So what's a seed going to need to sprout? Whether you're planting flowers or veggies, to germinate, you need four things: light or its absence, warm temperatures or cold, water, and oxygen. Of course, once they germinate, all seeds need light and warm temperatures. So how are you going to know what your seed needs? You have to check. You have to check the requirements for every seed. The seed sets the rules for the growing game. Knowing what each seed requires is kind of like finding a key to a strategy. We're going to step back a second for about 4 or 5 minutes for the new gardeners in the group. New gardeners face a number of considerations. First, you have to think, what do you want to plant? Blooms, food, herbs, grasses. Flowers fall into two basic groups, perennials and annuals. Perennials come back every year. Most have a bloom that lasts a few weeks, and they need to be divided when they get too big. Annuals die back at the first frost. And the advantage is you can change your landscape every year, but in terms of care, they do need to be replanted each year. Or if you're looking for veggies, what do you fancy? And do you want herbs? The research that you buy before you buy your seeds will pay dividends. By the way, the bottom picture in the lower right is my garden in early spring. It probably looks fine to you, but actually I have problems thinning. I find that challenging. So you want to know your garden spot. Where are you going to plant? In a garden, in a window box, in containers, in raised bed? Maybe a community garden is the solution for you. First and foremost, full sun, low wind. It's a good idea to study the sunshine wherever you're thinking of planting to see how much sun various spots get and what time of day. Is your area protected from wind? Because wind can be a culprit. Do trees shade your area? If so, you want to be away from them because you don't want to compete with them looking for nutrients from the soil. You can, and it's a good idea, to make a sun map. Record what parts of the garden are in sun or shade every hour from 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. I know that sounds onerous. If that's too much, just do it from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The next thing is that you need fertile, well-drained soil, except for herbs. Herbs really don't need very fertile soil. Ordinary soil is fine. A pH of 6.2 to 6.8, and we'll get a little bit more about pH in a minute. And you need to be near a water source. You want it to be easy to water. You may have great intentions, but if you have to bring a watering can, you're less likely to follow through all summer. Try and find a level area, and remember to pick a site where perennial weeds aren't rampant. So, what's the first thing that we mentioned? Lots of light. Vegetables need lots of light. For vegetables, the minimum sunlight is 4 to 5 hours, and that's for those leafy greens like spinach and kale and arugula and Swiss chard. Root vegetables, carrots and beets, seem to do fine with 5 or 6 hours. Tomatoes and green peppers, those fruiting vegetables, are going to need a full 8 hours of sun. When you plan your garden, make sure that the taller veggies aren't shading out your shorter ones, because that's going to affect available light too. Plant those staked tomatoes, trellised cucumbers, pole beans in the north end of your garden. It happens that flowers, like veggies, need a lot of light, 6 to 8 hours for most. If you see part sun, that's going to need 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight, with most being in the afternoon where the sun's hotter. Fewer plants are going to be part shade, 4 to 6 hours, with the direct sun being in the morning. There's a couple of plants to note. There's a coleus, which is stunning in a shade garden. This is a cleome, which is a full sun. Down on the lower right, you have a geranium, big root, macrorrhizum. And up here is this top picture, and here comes a commercial from your sponsor, is a picture of the demonstration gardens at Meg, the Mercer Education Gardens, where, when it's open, which it is not now, you can see demonstration, perennial, annual, herb, cottage, butterfly, native, and weed gardens, as well as a meadow and a demonstration compost area. I hope you'll visit when it reopens, and the information will be on our website. Now, your plants are going to grow in soil, and the soil provides the nutrients. The soil is the basis for success, so it helps to know how healthy your soil is, and a soil test is going to do that. Rutgers offers a test kit. It costs $20, and it lets you know if your soil is suitable for whatever. It actually asks you to say, what are you going to plant? Grass, flowers, veggies. And the test is going to tell you what your pH level is too. That's a measure of how alkaline or acid your soil is. If the pH is too low, too acid, or too high, it's going to affect the availability of nutrients. Now, some plants, of course, are going to need a little bit more acidic soil or more alkaline soil. If you don't want to get a soil test, that's fine. Just add an inch or two of compost to your garden soil each year. Actually, even if you do want to get a soil test, add an inch or two of compost to your soil each year. To set up your flower garden, there's a couple of issues to think about. How big are you going to start? What shape? I like to use a garden hose to figure out the arc of the garden. What plant colors are going to make you happy, and what colors complement them? And what are the heights and the widths of your plant at maturity? If you're planting perennials, what blooms in each season? Because there are perennials that bloom in the spring, in the summer, and the fall. When the blooms are gone, what textures are you left with to look at? Are you planning to include natives to attract pollinators? Are you thinking of maybe a rain garden? And do you have a focal point, like a bench or a bird bath to draw your eye? And remember, if you have shade, you can create a beautiful shade garden too, with primrose, pinks, columbine, all easily grown by seeds. Setting up your vegetable garden has similar considerations, you know, the sun and the soil, plus starting with the bed size and the shape. But you really need to pay attention to the size of your plants at maturity to space them efficiently. They can't be too crowded or they struggle for nutrients, and they shouldn't be too far away from each other or you're wasting garden potential and probably weeding too much. You do need to sacrifice some garden space for ample pathways to access your vegetables, and do plan to fertilize during the season. So as you think about crop selection, where are you going to find your seeds? Well, it's the dead of winter. Certainly, if you look outside, it looks that way. January and February is seed catalog season. It's time to think, what do I want to be eating this summer? What do the kids like? What's going to be fun to plant with them? There's always new varieties that invite experimenting, and some of Grandma's favorites sold as heirlooms. Choosing's exciting and expensive. It's so easy to be seduced by choice. So you might want to set limits for yourself. Grow vegetables that excite you or that are maybe expensive to buy when you go to the market. Grow flowers that please you, or to cut and bring inside, or to make dried flowers, or to attract butterflies and bees. If you're completely new to this, start small. Start online, but once you order from one of these catalogs, they will be coming for years and years and years. There's also a seed exchange, and I put that URL on the handout as well. As you wade through the catalogs or online, or if you're buying seeds in person at a store, not the fate for most of us, some terminology is going to be useful. Organic. Seeds from organically grown plants follow USDA guidelines, and they're grown without synthetic chemicals for at least 3 years prior to a garden or a farm being certified as organic. Open pollinated. Your seed packet might only be marked OP, but that means that it's been pollinated by wind, bees, birds, butterflies, bats, basically pollinated by nature. These seed breed true to type. You're going to hear this true to type often. It just means that the plant is going to look like its parent plant. Heirloom. These are older varieties, actually varieties that have been preserved for at least 50 years. They're usually field pollinated, but some are labeled organic too. Hybrids. They're kind of fun. They join the genes from 2 different plants, and they're developed for unique characteristics like disease resistance, or this color of the green squash that you can see in the lower left, which I understand is actually a squash that grows in Africa and is not a hybrid, but that's the kind of thing that hybrids give you. But you don't want to save those seeds and try and expect to get that plant, because they're not going to breed true. They'll randomly revert back to an original form. Some people worry about getting GMO seeds. Don't worry about it. No company sells GMO seeds to gardeners. They're simply not available to the general public. Rutgers University produces an astounding number of fact sheets to solve different home gardening issues. Here's one on growing tomatoes, fact sheet 678. Yes, they are all marked with a number. You can do an internet search for Rutgers fact sheets or for advice from other horticulture departments. Try to pick extension services that are in our hardiness zone, and I'll talk about that in a minute for advice that's applicable for timing. A key thing is to add the word extension to a query search, and that'll help you bring up those websites. So now you've done your thinking, you've got some packets, and you've got a packet in your hand. And I'm going to give you advice, and that is to read it and heed it. You're actually holding that key to the success for planting your seeds. It's going to tell you when to sow. It'll tell you whether to sow indoors or direct sow outdoors. It'll tell you the seed depth. And if you plant your seeds too deeply, they may not germinate at all. It'll tell you the spacing, how far the seed is sown from the next seed in the row and the space between the rows. And it'll tell you thinning, my nemesis, and a number of days for the seed to germinate, and then the days for the plant to harvest. It'll give you a freshness date, and there may or may not, you can see one packet has it and the other doesn't, be a planting map that divides the US into zones. We're 6B, 7A, and that's kind of right between the green and yellow on that particular map. It's going to tell you the number of seeds, how many are in your package, how many to plop in the hole. It's usually 2 or 3. It'll mention if it's organic. That's always marked because organic seeds are more costly to baby and coax through the disease challenges. They're always a little more expensive, but usually worth it. It'll have special instructions, like if it's deer resistant. And if you're lucky, it's also going to have a seedling picture so you can differentiate your seedlings from weeds nearby. It's really miserable to pull desirable plants thinking that they're weeds. Let's talk about the plant hardiness zones for a sec. Here's a map of the hardiness zone in our county, Mercer County, which, as I mentioned, is a 6B7A. That's probably one note that you might want to write down. Hardiness refers to the ability of the plant to survive the winter. It's based on 30 years of minimal temperatures in an area. So a 10, like in Hawaii or Florida, that means that your tropical plants are going to survive outside, and a 4 in Wisconsin, where I come from, means you have a much shorter growing season than we do here in New Jersey. Timing is essential. Timing requires that you keep an eye on your calendar. Your seed packets note the timing 2 times. First, the germination, that's the days to emerge from the seedlings to first appear, and then the days to harvest, when the fruit or the flower is ripe for picking. For indoor planting, the packet is going to say something like, start your seed 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost day. So here's where your calendar is going to be helpful. Mercer County's last frost day, that is the date in spring after which no frost appears. Ours is April 29th, if we believe the Old Farmer's Almanac. Counting back 8 weeks from that day gives you March 5th for planting 8 weeks ahead, or March 19th or anywhere in between for 6 weeks ahead to start planting indoors. For the record, Mercer County's growing season, that's the time from the last killing frost in the spring to the first killing frost in the fall, is about 166 days. And you always want to use viable seeds. It's recommended because fresh seeds won't even germinate at 100%, and old seeds will have a lower germination rate for sure, or they won't germinate at all. But maybe you have old seed packets at home from last year or years before, or maybe you told a friend you wanted to start growing some seedlings and they donated you some. You may not have to purchase new seeds if your seeds are viable. So you can do a germination test to see if your seeds are fresh enough. So here's what you want to do. You want to place at least 10 seeds between moist, not dripping wet paper towels. Put them inside a plastic bag. Leave that bag open and put it in a warm location. Check to make sure your bag doesn't dry out. Most seeds are going to germinate in 3 to 10 days, even though I wrote 4 to 6 on the slide. Then you want to carefully unwrap that paper towel and count the seeds that have roots. That's going to give you your germination rate. So if you have a percentage less than 50 or 60%, you might want to buy fresh seeds, or you can double up on the amount of seeds that you place in a hole. You know, seeds can survive a long time. In 2005, a report came out that 6 Judean date palm seeds dating from 2,000 years before had been found in the Masada Desert in Israel, and they had successfully grown 5 of them. However, they were outdone because now the oldest carbon 14 dated seed that's grown into a viable plant was Silene stenophylla. That's a narrow-leafed companion, an Arctic flower with really cute little white pebbles. It's native to Siberia, so we've got the desert and the Arctic, and the radiocarbon dating has confirmed an age of nearly 32,000 years, plus or minus 300. We're not expecting that kind of luck. If your seeds don't germinate, do replace them. When to start? It's now mid-February. You're not going to want to work outside today, and it's hard to suppress the urge to get started. Hold on. Seeding starts too early can lead to spindly, unhealthy plants. Once you start seeds and you start the germination process, then the seeds need to finish that process. So it's probably better to start a little late than a little too early. However, I will say that I pressed our horticulturist, and she said that slow growing, cold hardy crops like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts could be started soon. They're cool season crops, and they can be transplanted outdoors in late March, early April, as soon as you can work the soil. But warm season crops aren't going to go out until May. There are 2 tricks to help you with getting seeds coaxed out of their shell. Scarification is the act of chipping or nicking or filing or soaking a seed before you plant it in order to weaken that seed coat. You can use a sharp knife, which is what I like to do. Careful not to cut too deep or you'll disturb or cut the embryo, which I've done more times than I care to say. Some people use sandpaper or an emery board. Don't forget to pre-soak any shell that's a really hard, that you can see as a hard shell seed for at least 24 hours and rinse before you plant it. The other strategy is stratification. That's a fancy word for a really straightforward concept. It's basically tricking a seed into thinking it's been through the winter. Some seeds, like milkweed, need to be cold for a period of time before they're planted. That's what cold stratification provides. If the seed needs stratification, usually 4 or 5 weeks of cold is enough. You can put them in your fridge, and you have that time even now. But check, because some seeds need a couple of months of cold. Some people recommend putting soil or sand or sphagnum moss in the bag with the seeds that go in the fridge. As I understand it, if your plant needs dry stratification, you don't need to use a medium. If they need moist stratification, where you're going to put the sand and the seeds together and you moisten it a little, then you put the sand and seeds in about equal parts. If those seeds, you need to check them from time to time. If they sprout on you, be sure that you plant them outdoors. You might want to do it inside and put them into a container and then put that outdoors. You can also plant seeds that need cold directly outside. Often gardeners will put them into a pot, but as long as the critters don't eat them, they're going to be fine, and they're usually going to germinate on their own when the time is right, just like happens in nature. Now, all seeds can be direct sown. That means started outside. Some plants should only be direct sown because they don't transplant well. That includes the root vegetables like beets and carrots and radishes. So why are we going to the trouble of sowing indoors? Because our growing season isn't long enough to reap the fruits or the flowers of some of the plants that need almost 2 months more. Starting seeds indoor gives us a head start in the growing season, greater control over the conditions when the seedlings are tender, and weed control. And all you need are 2 essentials: a kind of container, maybe self-flats, seedling trays, pots with drainage holes. Anything that you put the soil in needs to have a drainage hole. And a soil-less, soil-free, sterile growing mix. Plastic trays are reusable. If you need to sterilize them first, not the toilet paper rolls or the paper cups, toss those. But the sterilization, I'll give you that in a minute. If you have a container that has a plastic on the top, you want to remove that plastic before the seedlings or as the seedlings begin to touch it. Plastic jugs are another popular option. I've seen really creative uses of plastic jugs and bottles. They're popular in children programs. You can create a mini greenhouse. Any type of container is going to work, anything you have around. If you have peat, plastic, recycled cartons, milk cartons, cardboard, you can make your own with newspaper strips. There are recipes online, terracotta pots. A lot of people like to use individual pots, so it's easier to transplant. And this is a new little gadget. They're called soil blocks, and you can see over here what it looks like. No pots are needed or trays. With your starter mix, you create the blocks and you take that whole plant outside, so there's no transplant shock because you transplant the entire bit. The second thing you need is a soilless mix. Now, you would expect that you can grab a handful of garden soil and use that, right? Actually, it surprises us all to hear that you don't want to include any garden soil in your mix. Garden soil is too heavy to start seeds in, and it can contain diseases and weed seeds. You will see online that some people will say, use your garden soil and just sterilize it in your oven. I have done that. The smell will last, it seemed to me, for weeks, and the stench was atrocious. So I would say avoid garden soil. Now, the growing medium must drain well and be disease-free. You can purchase ready-made soilless potting mix or seed starting mix, and it's probably an easier choice if you have a small garden or you want to start small. Some contain fertilizers, so check your label. Remember that the seeds come with enough nutrition to grow the embryo, so they don't actually need new fertilizer. And you can start your own mix with peat moss, coconut coir, or finished compost or vermiculite. Now, you may not have heard of coconut coir, and I'll tell you about this because peat moss is so environmentally horrible. It takes centuries to build a bit of an inch, and it releases carbon dioxide when it's extracted, so gardeners have moved to coconut coir. That's the part of the coconut inside the shell and before the meat. And then with your screened finished compost and vermiculite or perlite, you have a light soilless mixture. Now, when you're going to mix it, when you're going to get ready to use it, you want to add water. It should be the consistency of a chunky peanut butter. After you add the water, let it rest for 45 minutes. It should feel wet, but not drippy, and it should hold its shape. So now we are moving along and we are ready to start seeding. You want to fill your seeds with that mix. Tap your tray to settle it. It's a good practice to always moisten the soil somewhat first before you plant the seeds. Again, follow those packet instructions. Be sure not to plant the seeds too deep because they can, if they're too deep, they may not come up. In general, sow the seeds 2 to 4 times the diameter of the seed in your hand and 2 to 3 cells per 2 to 3 seeds per cell. You can thin it later. In this picture, you can see a pencil eraser was used to make dimples in the soil surface. You want to cover lightly with potting mix, but that's only if it says it requires dark to germinate, and gently from the soil. Most seeds require dark to germinate. Don't compress the soil, just gentle, so the seed gets that soil contact, but you leave enough air for the seed to get the air too. Now, you will find online that there are lots of things like this that say the care before germination, and these points are certainly worth going through one by one. So I'm going to do that. Most seeds germinate with the soil temperatures around 65 to 75 or even 80 or 85 degrees. After you plant your seeds, cover the seed containers with clear plastic or glass to maintain a high humidity. A waterproof heating mat is recommended. The bottom heat can be helpful to get the soil temperatures the right temperature, and these heating pads are available to buy, and they're not expensive. There's only one thing I want to be sure that you know. After the seeds germinate and you see the little green leaves, remove the heating pad. Keep the seeds and the seedlings constantly moist, but not ever wet. So what you want to do is, the best thing is to have a tray under whatever containers you have that have the drainage holes. And you want to pour water into the bottom of the tray where the seeds are, and let the medium wick up the water. But don't let those seedlings or your little containers stand in the tray. So what does that mean? It means that you want to water them, try to water early in the morning, by the way. You want to water them and come back a half hour later. And if there's still water at the bottom of the tray, toss that. Use a small fan occasionally to circulate the air in the planting area. It's going to help to move the CO2 that we mentioned earlier away from the plants. And as an extra bonus, it strengthens the stems. So the last thing I want to mention is labeling. This picture in the upper right-hand corner is courtesy of Margaret Pickoff, our horticulturist, who planted her seeds on the 19th of March last year, and she has labeled those. You can see those. So you do want to label your seeds because you don't want to wait till the flowers bloom to tell what plant it is. And you also might want to record your journey in a garden catalog. And it doesn't have to be as fancy as the one that you see on the bottom right here. Just anything that records the seed name, the date of the planting, the projected germination time. This is a chart, another kind of thing that can be useful to you to keep, that will tell you, you want to look up everything you're going to plant, what the optimum temperatures are, the days for it to emerge. You might want a column that says the days to harvest. Notice that it takes about 1 to 2 weeks for most seedlings to emerge, and you can see some of those optimum temperatures for the soil are a little bit higher than the 65 to 75, which is a general recommendation. So maybe you want to make a chart like that. Okay, well, here we are. You followed all these germination care instructions, and voila. To your thrill, and anyone else who's in the house that you bring over to see your little wonders, those seed leaves from the seed's embryo are breaking through. Now your plant is standing on its own stocky, we hope stocky, little stem. And now they're going to be able to convert light, photosynthesize, using the sugars for energy to make their own food. And they need lots of light, so give them light. In this photo, you can see the 2 cotyledon leaves. And then in the center, you might recognize the familiar tomato leaves. So those true leaves, the tomato leaves, mean that the photosynthesis has begun. And your plant's now on its own, and this is when you're moving it into the stronger light. You want to remove any plastic or glass covering that you used to invite better circulation, and maybe add a fan on the lightest setting also for good circulation. You want to fertilize with a water-soluble solution. And now you want to water them after they dry out a bit. Earlier we said you want to keep them constantly moist but not damp, not wet. Now they're going to dry out. Lights. So if you read the title of the slide, it says fluorescent lights over sunny southern exposure. You can see where we're going here. Your choice is to put the seeds in direct southern sunlight at a window or use a light setup. And I've got to tell you, all, ALL, all seed growers who write books or write for magazines favor fluorescent lights over a sunny window. That's because insufficient light's going to result in leggy plants often. And we're going to see that on the next slide. Most plants need 12 to 16 hours of light daily, and we don't have that in Mercer in March. I want you to note that if the plants get more than 18, they shouldn't get more than 18 hours of sunlight a day. That's the maximum. So you might want to put them on a timer and make sure that your lights aren't left on longer than that. Fluorescent lights that emit mostly blue light are good for encouraging new seedling growth. Red spectrum lights encourage flowering. A lot of people who do the two fluorescents will do one blue and one red. Bulbs that are marked grow lights mimic sunlight, and they're terrific. They're full spectrum and they're pricey. LED lights are the new kid on the block. Ones that emit 5,000 to 6,500 Kelvin are the most recent recommendation that I've seen, and I've seen that in a few places. But some growers still just use simple fluorescents and they have success. Lights need to be 2 to 4 inches above the seedlings. So as the seedling grows, you need to move your lights up, and that's easy to do if they're on a chain. So you want to set your lights for 12 to 16 hours a day on a timer. Now, a basement can be a good place to start your seeds. It's good with all the mess in the soil and the water. And if the air temperature is about 60 degrees, you're good to go. Now, if you're in a basement where it's 60 degrees, obviously the heating pad is going to be useful for getting that soil temperature to the optimum temperature. Alternatively, you can use direct southern sunlight exposure. Your seeds are going to germinate fine. The problem is that it might not be enough light for strong stems, although maybe a fan can help with that too. This is a picture of what leggy seedlings look like. And the problem with the window is you don't have control. The window can be cold. It can be the coldest place in your house, in fact, and it might limit root development. Pricking out, the next step. Isn't that an odd verb? It's the task of moving seedlings from where they're germinated and spacing them out on trays. You want to moisten the soil a couple of hours before you start. You want to pick out the healthiest looking sprouts with fewer than 5 leaves. By the way, I put 2 pictures in here. Hold it by the leaves, never by the stems, because if the stems break, the seedlings kaput. Have your transplant pots all ready with the potting soil in them, and thin them if they get too crowded or weak. It's safer to cut with scissors because you don't want to break the roots of the desirable seedling that you want to transplant. Keep your newly transplanted seedlings out of direct sunlight for about 24 hours. Now, despite your valiant efforts, fungi can get to them. Damping off is a fungal disease that young plant tissue is especially susceptible for, and they can wipe out every seedling in your container in less than a day. It can strike at any time, and they believe it's usually due to an unsterile medium or excessive moisture combined with a lack of ventilation, which is why I've mentioned the fan about 18 times already. The fan will help to circulate the air. There's no cure for damping off, unfortunately. The plants have to be discarded. So you want to watch for seedlings that fail to emerge from the soil, stems that are water soaked or thin, young leaves that wilt or turn a kind of a green, gray to brown. The roots can be stunted, as you can see in the picture, and there can be a fluffy white cob-like kind of growth on the infected plants. So to prevent damping off, you want to practice good sanitation if you're reusing your pots. You want to sterilize with a bleach or alcohol solution. That solution should be 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Don't reuse your potting mix. Make sure that your tools that are used for seedling maintenance are totally clean. You can wipe those down with alcohol. And don't forget appropriate water and light conditions, and that's circulating air. Now we're at the point where you're getting your seedlings ready to transplant. They're growing really nicely. Now you want to water when the soil is dry to the touch. The seedlings can't sit in that wet soil or they won't be able to take the oxygen they need. You want to, when you're getting them ready to transplant, hold back on fertilizing. And after germination, give the seedlings cooler conditions at night, like 55 to 60 degrees. And we're getting ready to move them outdoors. Hardening off. It's the process of getting your tender plants to slowly adapt to outdoors. About a week before you want to transplant outside, stop feeding them and water them only slightly. Then you're going to find a windless day. I usually put my seedlings in the garage for a couple of days. Put your seedlings in a sheltered outdoor spot for 2 to 3 hours a day. Keep them out of the direct sun. You want to do this for about 3 days. Then slowly introduce the seedlings to the sun and not the wind, and extend that outdoor playtime. By the end of the week, the root development should be stimulated and the plants, the cell walls and the stems are going to be a little stronger. Then they can be exposed to outdoor weather with wind and breeze or even gentle rain for 24 hours. Now we're ready to get them in the soil. First, make sure your soil is ready. So this is going to sound a little weird, but you want to check your soil moisture. If it's too wet, don't plant. And if it's too dry, water it. So all you want to do is you want to be sure that you've got that right moisture in your soil. You want to mend the hole with compost and you want to weed thoroughly. If it's possible, transplant on a warm, overcast day in the early morning. This is going to give your plants a chance to settle into the soil without being instantly exposed to intense midday sun. If you have to plant on a sunny, hot day, plant in the late afternoon. Then you want to soak the soil around the new seedlings immediately after transplanting so that you settle those roots. If it's kind of dry out, then spread mulch to reduce the moisture loss. Now, after a few days after you've transplanted, you want to fertilize so that you ensure that there's phosphorus, which promotes strong root development available for those new transplants. You want to mix a couple teaspoons, 2 teaspoons of a starter fertilizer, maybe a 15-30-15, into a gallon of water, and give the seedlings a cup of the solution, as I said, a few days after you transplant. Try to transplant before a rain so you aren't working the soil after a rain, because that denigrates the soil composition. If you find that you have native soil that's bad, it's compacted, there's low fertility, it's rocky, or you suspect lead, raised beds can be a solution. And you can tailor your soil to your crops. There's good drainage with these. They're easy to work. They're nice and neat. And you're probably going to have mulched or you can see here grass pathways. It's a good choice if bending's an issue. If you're building your own, use rot-resistant, untreated lumber like cedar or redwood. Those are good bed materials, and avoid pressure-treated lumber. And if you have a shady yard, maybe containers are your solution. Containers let you express your artistic side. There's so many choices, but they also have to be sterile and have good drainage. If containers are used, you want to sterilize them. Remember, the mix is 1 part bleach, 9 parts water, and rinse them well before you plant the seeds. Don't forget to use good soil. Make sure the plants in the containers all need the same conditions for light and water. That's going to make your work a lot easier. Now I'm going to mention a couple of propagation alternatives for those who are feeling iffy about starting seeds, or maybe you're going to be on vacation and you can't tend the garden as much as you'd like. So there are other ways of propagating that are also kind of exciting. Seed is only one way. Cuttings. You can take a plant cutting. I usually take more than what you can see in this water here, and stick it into water and watch it root, as you can see 3 stages here. Or you can take a stem, put it in rooting compound that you can buy, and then stick it into soil and you can watch it grow. Layering is particularly fun because you just bury a low limb and watch as it roots. I was actually trying to find a variegated dogwood for, I think, 2 years, 3 years maybe, to match what I had in my garden. And then I thought, oh my God, all I have to do is layer it. So I tried 5. I layered 5 to see what would grow and what wouldn't, but they all grew. So I have 3 for friends. It's great fun. And you just watch them take root. And I put a stone right here because then I felt it wouldn't get dislodged by any critter that came by or by me if I was walking by. So remember, there are lots of ways to create magic in the garden. The next 2 slides are just charts that you could find useful for our Mercer County Hardiness Zone 6B, 7A. This is a vegetable planting chart, and it just shows you the months from March to November for our growing season. And a chart like this helps you figure out what to grow when. Succession planting, once you're good at it, you can plant in the spring, the summer, and the fall in the same area. And that's what this chart is about. You'll notice that the spring and the fall have cool season crops. They're different from the warm season crops that are in the summer. Direct sowing of seeds outside is obviously easier. There's no grow lights, no heating pads, no containers, no transplanting, no hardening off. Just stick the seeds in a hole, water, fertilize, and watch, and protect them from small critters with some kind of a net. However, the essentials that we talked about still apply. 6 to 8 hours of sun, a good soil that's well drained, amended with compost. When you water, if you've planted your seeds there, you want to use a fine spray, not a heavy stream that could dislodge your seeds. There are plenty of veggies and flowers to direct sow. By the way, you might want to do them in rows, as you can see here, because then it's easier to identify weeds. So beans for vegetables, beans, lettuce, zucchini, radish, peas. For flowers, zinnia, cosmos, marigold, larkspur, nasturtium. For herbs, basil, dill, fennel, chives, cilantro. I've direct seeded those all. They are quite easy to grow in your garden. And speaking of herbs, let's look at herbs. They're easy to grow from seed. They don't take up much space. You only need to harvest a few leaves or a bunch at a time, so you don't really need much. And they're fairly disease resistant. You want to harvest them before the herb goes to seed and gets bitter. Here you can see 2 herbs, basil and dill on the bottom. And they are annuals in our area, but perennials like oregano, thyme, chives, also easy to grow from seed. And then you're going to have batches for years. The light requirement depends on the herbs. Most need only 4 hours, but basil and rosemary need a good 4 to 6 hours. The soil should be slightly acidic, but it doesn't need to be fertilized, though it should be well drained. And you can put some on your back stoop in pots. Annual flowers. We mentioned that annual flowers set seed and they die in a season. They're going to bloom all summer. So we need to replant them each year. In this picture, I put in four flowers that are easily direct sown. The top row has cosmos and Mexican sunflower that are tall. You want to put those. They're good to anchor the back of a garden. The zinnias in the lower left can range from 1 foot to 3 feet, and nasturtium lower right, these are all favorites of mine, are great border flowers. That Mexican sunflower is going to attract butterflies and native bees, and it needs little watering care, and like zinnias, it can be deadheaded. Deadheading is the gardener's term for just snipping or pruning back spent flowers, dead flower, the flowers after they've died. The seed packets are going to mark some seeds as cut and come again, and those are ones that will replenish and are easy to bring in for cut flowers. Perennial flowers, once you have it, you've got it for years. Now, some consider perennial flowers hard to grow from seeds, but some of them are quite easy. I have a list there: allium, penstemon, dianthus, columbine, and primrose. Although for some, it can be a long wait for a bloom. For coneflower, if you started from seed, it can be 2 or 3 years. Some perennials are sown in the spring like coneflower, but many perennials like rudbeckia are sown in the fall because they need stratification. There's an adage around perennials. The first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, the third year it leaps. And I'm going to add by the 5th year, you got to divide it. Ornamental grasses are not more complicated to grow from seed than anything else, or at least some of them are not. But the wind disperses these grass seeds, so you have to be fast gathering them up. They can be quite beautiful and add a splash of color and size and texture to your garden. And I want to end this talking about, I feel like it comes full circle, fall seed collection. Annuals, perennials, grasses, herbs, they're all going to set seed in the fall. But once you start to notice seeds, you're going to see them everywhere. The zinnia head that's spent in early August, you can snip and save for later. That's going to be true for veggies. If you're arugula bulbs and it's going to be too bitter to eat, let it go to seed and collect the seeds. I'm just going to remind you, you don't want to collect hybrid seeds. They're not going to breed true to type. The easiest ones to collect are self-pollinating ones like tomatoes and peppers and beans and peas. The next easiest are whatever's open pollinated varieties you plant. Seeds aren't viable till they're fully ripe. Beans, pea seeds, they're not going to be ready until the pod's brown and dry and beginning to split open. This is going to be true for any seed that grows in a pod. If you see seeds on the ground around a plant that you want to save seed from, tie a paper bag around the undeveloped seed head, and then the ripe seeds are going to fall into the bag. You probably want to save seeds from your best growers, the most beautiful zinnias that you plant, the sweetest peas. And if you save your own seeds from your best plants, you might begin to develop a strain of vegetables that's uniquely suited to your garden conditions. Seeds need to be thoroughly dry. Try and pick them on a dry day. If you can't, finish drying inside. You can put them on a fine mesh screen and let the air circulate around the top and the bottom for about a week or two, and then be sure that you label them. You want to put seeds into into paper envelopes or seed packets and mark them with the name and the date. Keep your seed packets out of humidity. Maybe you want to store them in a Ziploc bag or in a mason jar, put them in a cool place. Refrigerators, people recommend, they're good because the ideal storing temperature is between 32 and 41 degrees. Some people are going to put silica packets at the bottom of a mason jar with the seed envelopes to help soak up any moisture. If you use your fridge, then be sure that you let the seed packets reach room temperature before you open them, so there's no condensation. The resources are actually this whole thing. The books that I use, the presentations, fact sheets are all on your handout. And I'll encourage you to keep in touch. Email Margaret with any of your questions. Feel totally free to email me with anything. Our website is mgofmc.org. Right now, it'll have the tip of the month. For February, it's time to get pruning. It's going to have talks. Our community ed is providing a talk on February 25th on deer resistant design. There's going to be articles. The article that I noticed is there for this month is Jump Starting Spring, Starting Seeds Indoors by Margaret Montplaisir. And so you can get another take from a master gardener on starting seeds. And it'll have garden resources, how to plan your garden, and two things that I didn't get into anything about: maintenance, of course, because we're really only talking seeds. But weed control, pests, tells you about lawns, volunteer activities. There's just a long line. Mark the number down. It's on your handout. And for any of the horticulture questions, once Helpline reopens, that is maintained by Rutgers Master Gardeners of Mercer County. And I want to thank you for being here today. You know, it's pretty exhilarating when it all works. Just enjoy the journey and whatever it is that you manage to grow yourself from that magical little seed. And that's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Karen. I know it was a lot of information, but well done. Yes, at this time we'll be answering your questions. So if you do have any questions, you can submit them using the questions box in the dashboard, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. Please be a little patient. We already have some questions coming in, and we are going to try and get to everybody's questions. So just bear with us, please. So let's jump into it. What are your thoughts on winter sowing in plastic bottles outside, particularly for flowers such as snapdragons, bell of Ireland, sweet peas, and nasturtium?
Okay, that is not something, as I said, you may ask questions that I don't know anything about, and I really don't know anything about doing that. So, so I would have to research it. If you would just write down the person's name and the question, I will get back to them. And if there's a way for everybody to get the answer, that'd be great. I just don't want to answer something that I don't know about.
Okay. This was a couple people asked this. Can you recommend any particular grow lights or specific brands?
No, we don't tend to do that. We don't want to make any commercial recommendations. As master gardeners, we're asked not to do that. But I did include a couple of different resources under the lights slide. So every slide there are URLs for, and you will get plenty of information from what I get from what I did put in onto the handout.
All right. Where is MEG located? I believe this was in the beginning of your talk.
Yes, it's 1440, what is it? Parkside Avenue in Ewing, and that is also on your handout, so you don't have to write it down. If you can access the handout, it's right on the very first couple lines, maybe the second line. It's in Ewing. So you can visit that office, by the way, and talk to the master gardeners, or a lot of times somebody will say, I have a problem with a plant. It looks like it's diseased. I don't know what it is. So we'll ask you to bring the plant in, and then so you do need that once the office opens. It's really nice to access it. Nice to come in.
Do we not need a light source prior to germination?
So some plants are going to germinate in the dark and some need light, but during that time that you put your plants in, you're going to cover them with soil if it needs dark. You don't need any light source during that period of time. It's only once you start to see the cotyledon come up that you want to get them into and it's actually when the true leaves come up in between the cotyledon that you know that that plant is now doing photosynthesis and it needs to be in the light.
Right. The handout says not to store seeds in plastic. Why?
Because they can they can create mold. You don't want the moisture of the plastic. So if you're going to, you want to you want to store your seeds into something like paper before you put it into like a mason jar or into plastic, and then they've got that barrier. And then that's why I mentioned the silica packets that people, you get in a shoe container, or they throw them into all sorts of containers when you buy something, and it arrives those little small silica packets. So you can use those. Other people use dry powder milk at the bottom of the plastic bag, and that's to absorb the moisture. So you don't want to throw them into that and just waste the seeds that you've spent time drying and picking.
All right, a couple comments. We'll break it up before we get back to the questions. A couple thank yous, and one that says this was so interesting. So that's good to hear.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, might have missed it, but do you need to sterilize raised beds as well?
No, no. When you create the raised bed, and then you're going to add you're going to add fresh soil to that. You want to have some good. You want to go out and get good soil to bring in to put into those raised beds, and then just add compost each year to it. And you're not going to have to. No, you do not need to.
Okay. Do you have to repot houseplants?
Okay, that's a really great question because what you want to do with houseplants is it's there are complete lectures on what to do for houseplants. So for houseplants, you do want to be sure. Usually, they recommend that you change that you are looking in the spring to repot your plants in the spring. And you want to notice that if the roots are, if it's getting a little bit root bound, you want to move up one size. Never move more than one side, because that's not comfortable for your house plant. So what you want to do is, if you're, it is a good thing to do, and probably you don't certainly need to do it every year, but every couple of years you want to examine all of your plants all the time, but want to look at it, and it is a good idea to repot it, to repot the soil or add new soil on it. Make sure that it's a little bit lower than the rim. You don't want it all the way up to the rim, so that when you water it, it's easy for it to soak down. So you want to keep an eye on that and add new soil to it if you're not going to repot it. But it is a good idea to repot every couple of years.
All right. Should you continue to use heating mats under the seedlings once they germinate?
So that is something that's a really important question. As soon as those seeds germinate, you want to remove the heating mat. As soon as it germinates, take away the heating mat. And remember, as the seedlings get a little bit bigger, you actually want them in cooler temperatures at night. So you do want those mats away. It is only for that period of time to make sure, or try to make sure, that you get that optimum temperature, 65 to 75 degrees, or for some, as we saw in the chart, even up to 80 degrees. You want that soil temperature for the seed to germinate. So you want to mimic the conditions that they're going to have outside, and that's what that mat provides. And then take it away.
I have a hard time killing a perfectly good seedling when thinning plants, especially when they all look alike. Any advice on how to pick 2 or 3 equally good-looking seedlings and the courage to take their lives?
No, I have no advice for you. I said it in my talk. This is the thing that I hate the most. I mean, first of all, I can't throw anything out of the refrigerator until it's rotted. So looking at good seedlings and saying, I'm going to kill you, I find it really hard. what you have to do is you have to remember that those seedlings are all competing for the same nutrients in the soil. That's why I really loved that picture of the root growing and the plumule coming up, because you can see that those roots coming out, that they really do need their space. So if you think about that picture, this is the hardest thing I have about the seeds entirely, is getting rid of them. But what you want to do, you want to be looking for your straightest stem, and you want to be sure that they talk about, the word that they use is stocky. So if you have this little short stem that's kind of stocky, like it's strong, that's the seedling that you want to keep of those seedlings that are rounded, straightest. And I mentioned that you want to do it if there's 5 or fewer seedlings. So that means your 2 cotyledon leaves and then the true leaves that come out, and no more than one more. So don't keep the ones that are bigger than that, because they're not going to transplant into the potting soil as well. So I hope that helps a little bit. Stocky, look for stocky ones, look for strong ones, look for straight ones. And you just really have to steel yourself and say, yeah, I got to do this, because I want the one that's left to really be able to get those nutrients from the soil. Does that help?
Can you recommend a potting soil?
Um, what I look for is just, I like to look for an organic potting soil. And it kind of doesn't matter what company makes that potting soil, as long as you look at it, read the label, see what it says. Reading labels, I think that was one of the first things that I remember from my Master Gardener class was was the horticulturist saying over and over, learn to read the labels. So for the potting soil, I'm just looking for something that's organic. If depending on whether or not I'm using it outdoors or indoors, I'm going to want perlite in it or not. And so it's going to really completely depend on what your needs are for your garden, or for indoors, or for starting plants. It's going to tell you on it what the potting soil is for. I know when you go to the store, I really know this, when you go to the store, you're faced with all of these choices and it just feels overwhelming. So you can narrow it if you start with organic ones. Sometimes you narrow it to 1 or 2 choices. But think about what you need it for: outdoors, indoors, transplanting.
Um, Somebody has a recommendation for the first question that referenced snapdragons. They said that there's a master gardener from Virginia with a book called Cool Flowers and a YouTube channel called The Gardener's Workshop that deal with snapdragons and things. So certainly take a look at that if you have time.
Great.
I use a full spectrum LED grow light for my seedlings. I have struggled with leggy seedlings. Could this happen because the light source is too far away from the seedlings? And do you have any other recommendations?
I would try, you remember it's 2 to 4 inches above. So that would be the question that I'd ask, and try and start them where they're 2 inches above the seedlings, and that maybe that's going to help with that. It may be just a simple solution.
This is a follow-up to the transplanting of the house pots. They said, can I bring them into your facility to look at?
Yeah, when it opens, absolutely.
Is it best to order from catalogs or retail box stores?
Order seeds. Well,
Yes.
boy, do I have, let me just see a second. I have high mowing somewhere, but oh, yeah, here. So I'm just going to show you. Here's a picture. Here's some pictures from the seed catalogs. The choices that you have for seed catalogs are so enormous that it is, I mean, it takes a lot of work, but it is such fun to go through and see the kinds of seeds that the seedlings that you can get. It's night and day ordering ordering on, ordering from a seed catalog, from ordering, just from going in and turning the rack around and seeing what they happen to have and whether there's a nasturtium seed that's left, or can I get a zinnia or lobelia. I love to find a lobelia package and can never do that. So yeah, I think that buying from catalogs is a lot of fun. I included the Seed Savers Exchange. That is not just for exchanging. They also sell, they have lots and lots of things. And again, I recommend looking at organic stuff because of what they go through to get your seed, the seed to you. I think that's really a good thing to do.
Can tomatoes and peppers be easily grown in pots on my deck or yard?
Yeah, yes. Just make sure they have enough space. Yes.
Somebody commented that regarding to the MEG, that it's located on Federal City Road in Hopewell Township.
Yes, Meg, the Mercer
Yeah.
Education Gardens is located there. Yes. Yeah, it's also closed right now, unfortunately, because of COVID. In fact, we haven't been able to visit our gardens, so I have no idea what those demonstration gardens look like. I work on the perennial garden there, and I just think I just don't know what awaits us. We haven't been there for a year, so their demonstration gardens. We're going to need all the help we can get. Anybody out there who wants to become a master gardener, now's the time to look into it. It'll be fun when it reopens. We'll have a lot of work to do.
How large of a pot should I use for tomato plant, eggplant, cucumbers?
You know, there's recommendations for how much space each thing needs. So how many eggplants are you going to want to plant? And you need to go with those recommendations about space at maturity and figure out how many plants you want. A lot of people, I had actually thought to include it in the talk, but the talk was long enough as it was. But there's just ways of figuring out how much is going to feed your family when you how many plants you need to feed your family for the summer. So you want to figure out how many plants you want, and then you're going to figure out that width, and that width is going to tell you about what container you want to do. You need to, it's not just that you can say you need a 17-inch container. That 17-inch container might only do 3 plants. 17 inches is pretty big.
All right. If anybody else has any questions, we have some time, so please submit them. We'll just go through some of the comments that have come into. Thank you. This was a wonderful presentation, and I love all the visuals. This has been amazing. Thank you. Thank you for a great webinar. Thank you ever so much. And by the way, you had a Wisconsin native that attended today. Somebody says that they love high mowing, and this was awesome, and thank you.
Oh, that's so nice. It was a pleasure.
So,
Oh, good.
all righty. Well,
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
yes. This is my first webinar. Are these regular webinars? Will there be more? Our gardening webinars aren't held on a regular basis. We try to do a couple per year on different topics. So usually we try to do one before kind of the growing season and one maybe towards the end or in the middle on just different topics. So just please check our website for the most up-to-date information. So let's see here. Does Burlington County have a Master Gardener program or anything at Rowan?
I believe that Burlington County does. I'm fairly sure you can Google that. I mean, I guess I can try and Google it now. Um, yes, there. Yeah, I thought there was. There's a Master Gardener program at Burlington County. Yes.
Alrighty, well, I just like to thank you, Karen, for a fantastic presentation. I'd like to thank everybody who attended today. Be on the lookout from the email from me. In a couple days, it might be the beginning of next week, that'll include a recap of the handout, as well as a link to the recording, because there was so much information here that we'd love to be able to share that with you. So I just like to finally say, everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you again soon.
Thank you so much.